exploring how we can master ourselves by looking at how authors and experts say it is possible, with your host, Shashiti Basu. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 83 of How to Be with me, Shashiti, as your timid presenter, guiding you through life's tricky topics and skills by reading through the best books out there. Teaching history to children is essential for them to think critically, justify using evidence, and to thoroughly consider both sides of an issue before making a decision. In today's modern world, it is more important than ever to debate and consider information, not just accept what they are told. It also ensures our children understand the complexities of people, societies, and change, thus enabling them to understand their identity within society. It shows them models of good and responsible citizenship, right and wrong, morals and ethics. History's true value lies in how we apply lessons from the past to our present and future, ensuring our children do not accept things with passivity. Unfortunately, we haven't always shown them the full picture. So, why should we teach children the truth? Here is Darren Weale, PR based in Kent and a history lover. He's also part of the Let's Talk Better campaign, and parenting teachers expert and psychologist Angela Karanja on their thoughts.
Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. Look at H.G. Wells on the First World War. He called it the war to end all wars. It wasn't. Look at the coronavirus pandemic. We didn't see it coming, yet we had Spanish flu. The oil and coal industries have been obscuring global warming. And we had big tobacco obscuring cancer through nicotine. We need true history to learn and to act.
These are 3 reasons why I believe it's important for us to teach history to the younger generation. 1, history defines us, but it doesn't have to confine us, and I'll explain that later. 2, history shows us how far we have come. 3, history gives us an opportunity to reflect. You should look at history as where you started, not where you have to stay forever. That means it doesn't have to confine you. It shows us how far we have come and the progress, the growth. And learning history gives us an opportunity to reflect. Here's the thing, there can be no progress if we hide or pretend that history did not exist, especially when it's history based on terrible ignorance. But pretending and hiding is not the way forward. Instead, we find freedom and growth when we own up to the ignorance of our past. We can also learn and enhance our future by building on the things and the good stuff that we did in the past. As Maya Angelou used to say, when we know better, we do better. So I 100% believe and think history should be taught to young generation openly, but reflectively.
Our first book is from Sathnam Sanghera, who was born to Punjabi immigrant parents in Wolverhampton in 1976. He entered the education system unable to speak English, but went on to graduate from Christ's College, Cambridge, with a first-class degree in English language and literature. Between 1998 and 2006, he was at the Financial Times, where he worked as a news reporter in the UK and the US, specialised in writing about the media industries, worked across the paper as chief feature writer, and wrote an award-winning weekly business column. Sanghera joined the Times as a columnist and feature writer in 2007, and is a regular contributor on national radio and TV, having appeared on programmes including Have I Got News for You and BBC Front Row Late, and presented a range of documentaries, including The Massacre That Shook the Empire on Channel 4, which was shortlisted for the Best Factual TV Show at the 2019 Asian Media Awards. He has been shortlisted for the Costa Book Awards twice for his memoir The Boy with the Top Knot and his novel Marriage Material. Empireland was a Sunday Times bestseller that was longlisted for the Baillie Gifford Prize for Non-Fiction and won the Nibby's Book of the Year for Non-Fiction as well in 2022. It was adapted for BBC Two by Kudos Party Productions, featuring BAFTA-nominated performances, which won a MIPCOM Diversified TV Excellence Award, was named Best TV Programme at the 2018 Asian Media Awards, and Best Single Drama at the RTS Midlands Awards. We're talking about his new book, Stolen History, The Truth About the British Empire and How It Shaped Us. It was an incredible pleasure to speak to him, hence here is a snippet of our chat. But find the full interview on www.howtobe247.com or on the YouTube channel.
Someone had an idea initially who weren't Puffin, and I said no, because I didn't want to sanitize the history. I thought if you write about empire for kids, you're going to have to get rid of all the violence. And the violence is a big part of it. And I didn't want to kind of sugarcoat it. But then Puffin had an idea, and they said I could mention some of the violence. And yeah, they've been amazing, actually. Kids' books are much more of a team effort than adult books because you have an illustrator. The editing process is more intense because you've got to write stuff that's accessible to a certain age range. So yeah, it's been a really interesting experience. Yeah, I shouldn't mention the name of the illustrator because I didn't do the pictures, thank God. I am Jen Cartoon. I can't draw to save my life. She's brilliant. But yeah, I mean, it's incredible. I mean, it's on the national curriculum to the British Empire is, but not in a way that reflects what I think is its importance. It's the biggest thing we ever did as a country. And yet we concentrate mainly on World War I, World War II, and the Tudors. I wanted to write about it for kids because I think it explains nothing less than why we're a multicultural society. And that's because we had a multicultural empire. It's a very simple point, but I didn't understand it until I was in my 40s. And actually, I don't think the government understand it because they wouldn't have sent back all those people in the Windrush scandal if they had understood that those people were British citizens. So it causes huge problems that we don't understand this history. And the sooner we teach kids about it, the better, I think, for us as a nation. That history, I think it is essential. And the thing is, there were imperial dimensions to that history, which we weren't taught about. So I was never told that millions of Black and Asian soldiers had fought in both world wars. I'm not sure how you can study those subjects for 3 or 4 years like we did and it not being mentioned once. And also in the Tudors, there were Black people in Henry VII, Henry VIII's court. There were Black people in London in the 90s. Elizabeth I was complaining about there being too many Black people in London in the 1500s as well. So I think we systematically exclude this history and ignore it, and it causes us such big problems. Absolutely. Thing is, I started this book knowing a fair amount about the British Empire, but even I learned things. I didn't know that, HB sauce contained ingredients from the colonies. I didn't know that London Zoo was begun by Raffles, the guy who set up Singapore, and that we wanted to, collect all these animals from empire. And that story about how we were, competing for nutmeg with the Dutch in the Far East, in Indonesia, and ended up inheriting New Amsterdam as a colony in return for this tiny island of Run. And that then became New York City. These are things, all around us in our daily lives, even sugar and tea. And I think even adults don't understand that these commodities came into our lives in Britain because of empire. I think there's lots of reasons for that. I think one reason is that it's very complicated history. Empire went on for 400 years. People disagree about when it began, when it ended, what it involved. Much easier to talk about World War I and World War II. Clear beginning, clear end. Also clear morality. And with the British Empire, some very difficult things happened. With World War II, we can basically go around saying that we were the heroes. And we were. We beat the evil racist Germans. But with British Empire, there's no getting over the fact that for at least a century, it was proudly racist. And we sent a shocking number of people across the Atlantic as slaves. So I think that's one reason. Another reason is that I think a lot of the history was deliberately suppressed, and the British went out of their way to hide the documentation. I've been reading about Nigeria recently, and Goldie, one of the men who were involved in establishing Nigeria, he was getting rid of documentation as he was doing his colonialism. He knew there were things to hide, and it turns out there were good things to hide. And I think it's taking a lot of time for historians to catch up, which is why suddenly you have a huge interest in empire, even though empire ended a long time ago. Yeah, it's often said, people often ask me, didn't you feel angry when you read about all this history? And no, I felt the opposite. Obviously there's things that are really upsetting. The violence and the enslavement and the looting is really upsetting, but it also explains a lot about my life. Not only the reason you and I are here today talking is because of empire, but then things like the Sikh identity was created by British Empire. I'm Sikh. The sheer number of Sikhs that exist is largely because the British, or to some degree, due to the British favouring us as a loyal ethnic group. But I learned the other day that English literature as a subject existed in India before it existed in Britain. It was almost imported back into Britain as a subject of study. So many things about my life and your life and our museums, our politics, our food, our royal family can be explained by this history.
Stolen History covers a range of topics including the East India Company, the slave trade, the Boy Scouts' origins, and Wembley Stadium. It also provides short biographies of historical figures like Sir Walter Raleigh, Charles Ignatius Sancho, and Robert Clive, along with guidance on navigating sensitive conversations or organising debates about reparations in schools. Sanghera expresses faith in young people's ability to form their own opinions about the British Empire, as well as other historical subjects. He believes that children, often highly opinionated, possess the capacity to handle conflicting views. Acknowledging that readers should develop their own perspectives when engaging with books, including his own, he emphasizes the importance of allowing children the space to explore and understand complex ideas. In collaboration with illustrator Jen Khatun, who brought her Bangladeshi Indian heritage to the project, pictorial representation of the empire required careful consideration, particularly when dealing with sensitive topics such as slavery. Sanghera acknowledges the potential explosiveness of every illustration and the need to balance historical accuracy, modernization, and cultural sensitivity. During his research, he discovered his lack of knowledge about the empire's influence on certain aspects, including the life of Deen Muhammad, the subject of his original project. This realization led him to delve into the history of empire, coinciding with the heightened global interest in systemic racism and colonialism sparked by the murder of George Floyd. Split into 7 chapters, Sanghera looks at what was the British Empire, why don't we know more about it, items that were potentially looted and now contested, how the British Empire shaped our towns, cities, and countryside, why British families are from so many different places, our role now in thinking about empire, and what we can do about it. He explains the challenging terms that we often come across and perhaps are unaware of, and breaks it down to make it understandable for young people, including imperialism, colonialism, empire, plantation owner, selective amnesia, jingoism, as well as loot and etymology. You'd be surprised how much we may not even know as adults. For example, at its peak, around a century ago, the British Empire covered 13.71 million square miles and included India, several countries in Africa, Canada, Australia, and numerous Caribbean islands. That is a quarter of all the land in the world. Or to put it another way, if all Britain's empire in the early 1900s were put together, it would cover almost the entire surface of the moon. He does not gloss over the difficult subjects, but makes it understandable. He does not sugarcoat that more than 3 million people from the continent of Africa were transported as slaves during the British Empire, with many of them dying on the journey due to terrible conditions on the ships. Stolen History highlights the multicultural nature of Britain and the impact of immigrants from various religious backgrounds, including the establishment of the first mosque in 1889 and the contribution of Irish immigrants. It also touches upon the involvement of citizens from colonies in both world wars and the significant event of the Nationality Act in 1948, which granted the right to live in Britain to individuals residing in the colonies. He talks about areas that had a significant historic role in empire, including Bristol's slave imports, Liverpool's cotton and sugar slavery imports, and Lancashire mills that used that cotton for textiles. It showed that despite the grim history, people from around the world have been in the country for centuries. And in modern history, during the 2 world wars, millions of citizens from the colonies fought and died alongside British soldiers. And as both Sanghera found out while researching the book, and I found out while reading the book, that in 1948, after the Second World War, the UK government passed the Nationality Act, which basically gave everyone who lived in the colonies the right to live in Britain. At that time, that was a staggering 600 million people, around 9 times today's population of Britain. So although we often hear about immigrants coming to this country, they were actually invited. Sanghera also explains the role of the East India Company, which was established in 1600 to trade in silk and spices from Asia. The company was soon given extraordinary powers by the British government, allowing it to colonize and run countries, most notably India. It printed its own money and it had its own military force, which was twice the size of the British Army. Sanghera writes, But with its vast power, the East India Company became greedy. It illegally sold opium, a dangerous drug, to China, which killed many people and destroyed many lives. Also in the 17th and 18th century, it traded in products that relied on slave labour. This also includes inducing famines as a result of its policies, such as the 1770 famine in West Bengal, which killed millions. It was eventually shut down in 1874 when it grew unruly, but its effects are still felt today. Similarly, Sanghera brings up well-known entities that we may not realise was associated with the empire, including HP Source, which actually stands for Houses of Parliament, the Scouts, which was created in the early 1900s to ensure imperialism thrived from a young age, as well as statues dotted around the UK that are seriously questionable. Sanghera told me that statues cannot be treated as sacrosanct. They represent what people in the past chose to celebrate and memorialise. They do not represent true history. The journalist says that sometimes even pets weren't safe. When the British invaded China and burned China's Summer Palace in 1860, officers came across a Pekingese dog and decided to take it back home as a gift for Queen Victoria. They even named the dog Luti. He raises the question for young people to answer about whether we should return stolen or taken property. Let's not forget the Commonwealth, an institution we hear about especially during sporting events. The modern Commonwealth was established as a way for Britain to keep some connection with these independent countries, including India, who got their independence in 1947, as well as USA, Canada and Australia. Today, there are 54 independent countries in the Commonwealth family. One of the most baffling facts for me was finding out that an island near Indonesia named Run was only 2 miles across, was the only area in the world where nutmeg was also available, and as a result, it was incredibly valuable. Nutmeg bought in Run could be sold on in Britain for 600 times the price. A battle ensued between the Brits and the Dutch for this tiny isle, hence the Dutch blockaded the area. Eventually, the British lost interest in Run and in 1667 agreed a deal with the Dutch. The Dutch would give Britain an island they had colonised on the North American coast, which was then called New Amsterdam. King Charles II gave the American island to his brother James, Duke of York, which is why New York was named so. In summary, Sanghera's Stolen History aims to provide young readers with an honest exploration of the British Empire while trusting in their ability to form their own judgments. The author's engagement with children has been a source of learning and inspiration, emphasizing the importance of allowing space for their curiosity and questioning. Our final book is How to Be a Young Anti-Racist, which is aimed at young readers that explores the concept of anti-racism and provides guidance on how to actively work against racism. Written by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, a renowned scholar and author of Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist, and Nick Stone, a best-selling young adult author. The book offers a relatable and accessible approach to understanding and challenging racism. Here are the authors speaking to CBS Morning.
I asked flat out, I said, if you ever decide you want to do a young reader's edition of How to Be an Anti-Racist, like Stamped was done for Stamped from the Beginning, consider me as a person who could adapt. Mm-hmm. It worked.
Nick Stone, her best-selling work, her voice, her connection to young people. I wanted this book, the voice of this book, to be targeted to our youngest readers. Well, I wanted young people to be able to understand what they're experiencing. Young people are experiencing racism. They're trying to make sense of it. You have young white kids who are being targeted online by white supremacists. You have teens of color who are facing multiple instances, according to studies, of racist discrimination per day. They don't understand what's happening to them because nobody is explaining it to them, and no one's sharing with them how to change the world and how to be a young anti-racist does.
Yeah, the story I wanted to tell was the story that Ibram told in How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's his own story. It makes it very relatable. His willingness and his courage when it came to just admitting that he had racist ideas was very helpful to me as I was reading How to Be an Anti-Racist. And we had an event last night in Atlanta, and we had a teen moderator, and she was telling us how reading How to Be a Young Anti-Racist helped her to see racist ideas that she has, right? That's what we want young people to experience. We want them to be able to identify with the story and also see that they can change things. Me and the father of my children, I have the two boys, we're real big on making sure that they are both prepared for the world the world they're going to enter, but also empowered, right? Like, I think that we can sometimes, as Black parents, instill a measure of fear that trumps everything. So making sure my kids understand the world that they're going to be in, but also understand that they do have the power to change it. Like, that's also what we're going for with the book.
Well, I mean, if your child does not see and understand difference, I mean, in other words, there are different skin colors and all those skin colors and all those groups are equals, then it's incredibly important for them to see that. But they also see that certain people have less. So they're trying to figure out why. Why is it that Black and brown people disproportionately have less in this country? And we need to explain to them, it's not because there's something wrong with them. It's because of racism. And here's how you join the struggle to fight against it.
Historian Professor Kendi says what you need to know before getting started is that, number one, racism is real and dastardly villainous, and denial is what keeps its ugly heart beating. Number two, racist is more an adjective than a noun, and it's not an insult. Number three, not racist is not a thing in the fight for a more equitable world. There's racist and there's anti-racist. Number four, colorblind as applied to race is also not a thing. It, like not racist, is part of the denial that keeps lifeblood pumping through that ugly and insidious heart of racism. He says you'll have to come to see the movement from racist to anti-racist as always ongoing, requiring understanding and snubbing racism based on flawed ideas about biology, ethnicity, body, culture, behavior, color, space, and class. Because anti-racism also involves standing ready to fight at racism's intersections with other forms of prejudice and bigotry. Before anything, however, we have to face ourselves, and that means understanding why definitions matter. It describes the transformative experience of the author's parents at a conference called Urbana 70, where they were introduced to Black theology and the concept of Black liberation theology. The conference featured a band called Soul Liberation and a keynote speech by Tom Skinner, who discussed the history of racism and its connection to faith and freedom. This experience changed the worldview of the author's parents and led them to integrate their Christian faith with their fight against racism. They became involved in challenging racist theology and organizing programs aimed at confronting racism within Christian communities. Professor Kendi also provides definitions of key terms such as racism, racist, anti-racism, and anti-racist, emphasizing the importance of having a clear understanding of these concepts in order to work towards racial equity and justice. So here is a definition of the terms. Racism is a powerful collection of policies that sustains racial inequities or injustices and is substantiated by ideas of racial hierarchy. It's also known as institutional racism, structural racism, and systemic racism. Racist as an adjective is in support of an inequitable or unjust policy through action or inaction, or expressing an idea of racial hierarchy, both of which produce and normalize racial inequities or injustices. A racist policy is any policy that produces or sustains racial injustice or inequity between racial groups. Racist power is when policymakers create and uphold policies that sustain racial inequities or injustices. A racist idea is any idea that suggests one racial group is inferior or superior to another racial group in any way. On the other end of the spectrum, here are the terms to redefine the concepts. Anti-racism is a powerful collection of policies that lead to racial equity and justice and are substantiated by ideas of racial equality. Anti-racist as an adjective supports an equitable and just policy through action or inaction, or expressing ideas of racial equality, both of which produce and normalize racial equity and justice. Anti-racist as a noun is where one who makes the conscious decision to support or enact equitable and just policies and expresses ideas that produce and normalize racial equality while denouncing, pointing out, and standing against policies and ideas that sustain racial inequity and injustice. Racial equity is when two or more racial groups are standing on relatively equal footing and experience relatively similar and/or equal outcomes. Whilst an anti-racist idea is any notion that suggests that all racial groups are equals and none need developing. He writes, the only remedy to racist discrimination that leads to racial inequity is anti-racist discrimination that leads to racial equity. To achieve the goal of racial equity, racist discrimination that created an advantage for white people in the past, and nobody can deny that there was a crap ton of it, will have to be countered with anti-racist discrimination that levels the playing field for non-white people in the present. Professor Kendi goes on to talk about the war on drugs policy, which was initiated by Nixon and reinforced by Reagan. It led to significant racial inequities that persist to this day. The policies involved stronger law enforcement, more police officers, harsher penalties, and mandatory sentencing. Despite similar rates of drug use amongst racial communities, Black and Latinx individuals were disproportionately incarcerated. Racist ideas perpetuated the belief that more Black people using and selling drugs led to their higher arrest rates, reinforcing negative stereotypes. Federal grants further fueled racial inequities by incentivizing more drug arrests in low-income areas populated by Black and Latinx individuals. The socioeconomic disparities and unequal power dynamics between white and minority communities exacerbated these issues. Some Black individuals, including the parents of the narrator, became conflicted, with one mind seeking liberation and the other endorsing incarceration. They sought both an end to police brutality and improved social conditions, while also calling for stricter law enforcement and punishment. This internal struggle between anti-racist and assimilationist ideas influenced their perspectives. Assimilationist ideas rooted in white supremacy pushed for conformity to white standards and contributed to internalized racist beliefs. The dueling consciousness created a sense of shame while simultaneously acknowledging the worth of Black individuals. This internal battle mirrored the broad racist divide between segregationist and assimilationist ideas. Segregationist policies aim to segregate, incarcerate, and harm people of color, while assimilationist policies sought to develop and integrate racial groups based on white standards. Both types of policies perpetuated racial inequities and discriminatory practices. Professor Kendi emphasizes the importance of adopting an anti-racist mindset to recognize the equality and potential of all racial groups, leading to liberation and the dismantling of systemic racism. He says that racism doesn't actually come from race. Race comes from racism. Race is where a socially sustained power construct was created to separate and define collections of people based on observable shared characteristics, whilst race itself is an illusion. There's nothing concrete about it, it's only as real as we believe it to be. Apparently there's a phrase that comes to prominence when you're in your 30s, and it's mostly used around the concept of gender, which is power construct. A power construct is a concept or idea created by powerful members of society and perpetuated by large-scale acceptance that exists not in objective reality, but as a result of human interaction. Race is therefore a power construct, and it was created to give credence to some messed up beliefs and actions held and committed by a people group, fair-skinned Europeans, who deem themselves superior to all others. Race continues to exist, give, and take power, as well as create interpersonal dynamics, because a long, long time ago, enough people believed this claim of superiority to make it true. In the 1400s, Prince Henry, the navigator of Portugal, funded voyages to West Africa to capture Black individuals for forced labour, which shifted the focus of human trading to African bodies exclusively. In the 1450s, an account was transcribed by Gomes Inns de Zurara, depicting perceived Black inferiority and creating a separation and hierarchy based on skin tone. In the 1500s, Spanish and Portuguese colonizers in the Americas justified enslaving Africans and mistreating indigenous peoples by contrasting their perceived strengths and weaknesses. In the 1700s, Carl Linnaeus, a Swedish scientist, concretely defined race by color coding and creating a hierarchy based on arbitrary characteristics. These racist ideas were used to justify and perpetuate racist policies, serving the self-interest of those in power. In terms of biology, researchers from the Human Genome Project released findings indicating that more than 99.9% of the human genome is the same for all individuals, regardless of race. Some people interpreted this remaining 0.1% as the explanation for racial and social differences, while others used the concept of genetic sameness to argue against racial categorization altogether. However, simply refusing to acknowledge race does not address the existing inequities and racism in society. Being anti-racist in biology means recognizing genetic similarities and focusing on ending racism based on false biological differences. Professor Kendi then discusses the term microaggression and its evolution. It originated from the observations of African-American psychiatrist Chester Pierce, who used it to describe the subtle but constant verbal and non-verbal slights inflicted on African-Americans. Over time, the term expanded to encompass bias-based degradation of any marginalized group. Microaggressions are defined as brief, everyday exchanges that send denigrating messages based on group membership. However, the author expresses a dislike for the term, finding it inadequate, and prefers to describe these actions as microaggressions, racist abuse. The author argues that the term abuse accurately captures the harmful effects of these actions on individuals, such as favoritism, gaslighting, and discriminatory remarks, which can lead to confusion, distress, anger, and other psychological impacts. The author emphasizes that there is nothing micro about the harm caused by these actions. He also reflects on the topic of behavior as it relates to racism. They discuss the prevalence of behavioral racist ideas, which link behavior to racial group membership and hold individuals responsible for the perceived behavior of entire racial groups. He explores historical examples of how behavior has been attributed to racial groups, such as the pro-slavery and abolitionist views in the 19th century. The author also highlights the influence of standardized tests like the SAT in perpetuating racist ideas about Black students' academic achievement. Professor Kendi recounts their personal struggles with academic performance, internalizing racial stereotypes and feeling judged primarily by older Black individuals. They share their realization that individual behavior cannot reflect on an entire race and challenge the notion of racial group behavior. He concludes by mentioning a college encounter that prompts the author to recognize the presence of behavioral racist ideas within their own community. There is also the element of realizing and confronting internalized racism. The author reflects on their own racist beliefs and acknowledges that anyone, regardless of race, can hold racist ideas and perpetuate racial inequities. They also discuss the controversy surrounding the use of the N-word, distinguishing between its derogatory form with a hard R and the reclaimed form with an A. This is referred to as linguistic reappropriation, the cultural process by which a group reclaims words or language historically used to demean or disparage, creating semantic change that neutralizes the words over time. While choosing to be anti-racist involves standing against and calling out white racism, the racist words spoken, actions taken, and policies enacted by people who are white, it also means choosing not to hate white people. There's only something wrong with white individuals when they embrace racist ideas and policies and then deny that said ideas and policies are racist, especially when confronted by people of color. Racial ambiguity has always been the standard of beauty, favoring lighter-skinned individuals over darker-skinned people. This bias, known as colorism, has its roots in historical ideas of racial hierarchy and has persisted throughout recorded human history. Light-skinned individuals have traditionally been treated better than their dark-skinned counterparts. For instance, during slavery, light-skinned enslaved people were given preferential treatment, often working in the house while dark-skinned individuals were relegated to physically demanding fieldwork. Enslavers even paid more for light-skinned women. Colorism not only perpetuates inequities between lighter and darker people, but also leads to discrimination within racial or ethnic groups. This interracial discrimination can be observed among Black individuals, where some derogate and dehumanize dark-skinned girls and guys in favor of those with lighter skin. Regardless of whether colorism is practiced by dark-skinned or light-skinned individuals, the underlying issue of unchecked white supremacy remains the true enemy. Bodily anti-racist ideas do away with the racist idea that certain bodies, especially Black ones, are dangerous by virtue of their existence. It means not viewing relatively high rates of recorded violence in low-income Black neighborhoods as confirmation or evidence that Black people are innately more violent. Intersectionality refers to the overlapping systems of oppression that individuals or groups face due to various social characterizations, such as race, gender, class, orientation, ability, and ethnicity. Race-gender refers to the combined identity marker of an individual or group's race and gender. It encompasses terms like Black woman, white men, Latinx trans women, and Asian non-binary people. Gender-racist ideas perpetuate notions of superiority or inferiority between different race genders, leading to injustice and inequity. The traditional status quo asserts that an individual's gender is determined by their chromosomes and reproductive organs. Males are considered bigger, stronger, dominant leaders and protectors, while females are seen as smaller, weaker, submissive followers, primarily responsible for childbearing and raising children. Gender racism lies at the core of concerning race-gender disparities. Examples include black women earning only slightly more than white women with high school degrees, higher poverty rates for black and native women, higher pregnancy-related mortality for black women compared to white women, disproportionate incarceration of black girls, and higher birth rates among black and Latina teens compared to white teens. And just like with gender, a new and grotesque monster rears its double head at the race orientation intersection: queer racist ideas. A queer racist idea is any notion that suggests that one race orientation is superior or inferior to another race orientation in any way, or justifies policies that lead to injustice or inequity between race orientations, whilst race class is a grouping of people at the intersection of race and class. To combat racism, prepare yourself to act like a firefighter. 4 important skills, all beginning with C, are essential. Cogency involves clear and convincing communication supported by research. Compassion is crucial for understanding the suffering of victims. Creativity is needed to replace flawed ideologies with new solutions. Collaboration, connecting and working together, is the key to effective change. Start small, but aim for collective and impactful actions. So to sum up, Sanghera says stolen history provides crucial information about colonialism that the author wishes they had known earlier in life. It emphasizes that the history of the British Empire is not just a part of minority ethnic groups, but also white history. The book acknowledges the distressing aspects of imperialism and encourages positive action such as asking questions at school and museums and being an ally by listening and understanding others' experiences. Dr. Kendi and Nick Stone say in How to Be a Young Anti-Racist that in the face of racial stereotypes and injustice, racist ideas limit the thinking and opportunities of black youth. The fight against racism is ongoing, and the author expresses a dream for a future where everyone is anti-racist and racism is abolished for good. Knowing about history and understanding constructs from an early age is crucial. What's worrying is this increase in book bans in the US, a topic I discussed with Searching for Sylvie Lee author Jean Kwok, as her own book is currently challenged. Find the interview on the website. Please join in on the conversation by following @HowToBe247 on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and subscribe on the podcast, which can be found via www.howtobe247.com. Please do leave a review if you found this helpful and you want to be featured. Thanks to businesswoman, speaker, and certified wellness coach Yanira Pui, who said she loves how the information is digestible. Remember to check out Patreon for exclusive unseen bonus material from every single interview, or for a price of a coffee. And don't forget to check out the new website. Before we go, here's Shriya Boppana, who is an Indian-American beauty pageant title holder, activist, author, and on-air personality. She is best known for being Miss India America 2020, and her anti-sex trafficking advocacy work has been featured on ABC as a Future Leader of America, Fox 5 as a Voice for the Voiceless, and Flaunt Magazine as a new Generation Beauty Pageant Champion. See you next week.
I think it's very important to teach younger generations about real history because the sooner we expose them to the prejudice, discrimination, norms, and expectations of society, the sooner they can process and genuinely understand their place within it. We can't continuously erase historical experiences and moments or present them from a one-sided or one-dimensional viewpoint because that not only diminishes significant identity-defining incidents, but it decreases a person's ability to sympathize and truly understand the background of others or even themselves. Younger generations deserve to know an accurate recount of history that will help them understand the resources they have or do not have at their current place in time and understand the sacrifices or journeys others have taken for them to be where they are today.